You can never truly know when the worst day of your life is coming. It's always waiting for the perfect moment to spring out, to become an unexpected bump in the tracks that derails your entire life. Of course, Maya couldn't have known that she was living in the worst day of her life. She had pancakes for breakfast. A boy told a great joke in her science class. She even finished her homework early. How could she have ever believed her worst day had finally arrived, looming over her like a dark shadow? According to Maya, the woods were the soundest place to be. They were a secret haven, nestled in between her backyard and the middle school she walked to every day. The towering trees burst from the ground, sheltering her with the colorful leaves. They were mighty towers that she pretended were part of her own fortress, a powerful force that sheltered her from the troubles of her everyday life. She could close her eyes and breathe in the delicious concoction of crisp autumn air and tangy pine and leaves still wet from a recent downpour. Maya flourished here, and she walked home from the school one afternoon with an extra spring in her step. The keychains on her backpack jangled as she hopped carefully from stone to stone across the bubbling creek. She hummed to herself a new song she'd learned in chorus class that day. Relishing this tiny place of freedom, she passed a bulky tree, smiling up at its branches, blissfully unaware of the figure hiding behind it, waiting to spring out at her. Maya tumbled to the ground with a hard thud, and her backpack slid up her back as her legs flew back over her head and she rolled over. Another body collided into her, arms clutching round her waist, as it dragged her down into a swooping ditch in between the trees. Maya cried out, trying desperately to untangle her arms from the knot of limbs, but she couldn't. The knot separated as they crashed into a pile of leaves. Maya felt the weight leave her, and her eyes fluttered open, suddenly blinded by the blank slate of the gray sky above her. She could hear the leaves next to her shuffling wildly, and soon her attacker was standing right over her, his shadowy frame filling her vision. "Rowan!" Maya shouted as she sprang up from the ground, still covered in a layer of crumpled leaves. She punched the shaggy-haired boy in the shoulder. Rowan laughed, revealing the gap between his two front teeth. "You should have seen your face," Rowan said, clutching his stomach in the hope of containing his laughter. "I already knew you were there," Maya said defensively. "Yeah, right," Rowan said, brushing his hair out of his face. His locks were dark chestnut, often unkempt, and just covered his deep hazel eyes. Maya stared a little too long at him and was startled as his hand reached out to help brush the leaves from her clothes. She felt a tiny spark, almost like a minuscule zap one gets from a wool sweater, as Rowan picked a bright orange leaf from her jacket sleeve. Maya often felt this way when Rowan was around. He was almost like lightning to her, though she couldn't quite sum up this feeling into perfect words. "Oh, I missed one," Maya said, but Rowan beat her to the leaf still burrowed in her amber hair. "Your hair is soft," Rowan said nonchalantly. Even with his indifferent tone, Maya still took it to heart as a compliment. At 14, she was not really starting to think about boys, but whenever she was with Rowan, she felt different. "Race you to the rock," she said as she took off. She was already halfway to her favorite spot. Rowan groaned, shuffling awkwardly through the piles of leaves, kicking them up into the air. They sat on their rock, looking out at their neighborhood, nestled safely below.